Final speaker this evening is Dr. Ryan Anderson. Dr. Anderson serves as the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center that is headquartered in Washington, D.C., where he advocates for the application of Judeo-Christian tradition to law and culture and politics in pursuit of civic and cultural renewal. He is a prolific and internationally acclaimed author and speaker, and he has been on the front lines of the battle of ideas regarding abortion, marriage, gender identity, and the family for decades. And his work, honestly, is very compelling and very effective. One testament to his impact is the fact that his research has been cited by two U.S. Supreme Court justices, Justice Samuel Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas, in two separate Supreme Court cases. Tonight, Dr. Anderson is speaking on potential policy paths that are aimed at strengthening the family, and he will cast a vision for the long game for us social conservatives as we work together to renew culture. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Anderson.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you to Richard for the invitation to be here. It's a real pleasure to speak with Denny and with Dr. Moeller. It's not a pleasure to have to go last, because I find that I speak better when the people go after me, so I'm not being judged by how well they did, and I thought they both did an excellent job. Colin was too generous. He mentioned the Supreme Court justice citations. I thought he was going to go there, that his work has been influential because Amazon censored my book for 4 years, the book that Denny was kind enough to mention. You can get it for sale now. It's amazing what happens when an inauguration takes place. Jeff Bezos was standing behind Donald Trump because the inauguration was in the rotunda this year, not outside because it was cold. And a bunch of us just started getting on Twitter because, during the inauguration address, President Trump said, it's now the policy of the United States that there are only two sexes, male and female. And so I tweeted, does this mean my book's for sale again? And eventually it was back for sale. What I want to do in the time that I have, because Richard and Colin have asked me to kind of focus on law and public policy, I want to say a little bit about where we are in terms of why law and policy won't be sufficient to get us out of this. I do want to answer the assignment and actually talk about what sort of pro-family policies we should be advocating for, but I want to put this in a certain context. And I also want to start by just affirming the thesis of tonight's conference, that the family is the key to cultural renewal. And then I'll go a step deeper, and Dr. Moeller mentioned this as well. And the key to that is going to be the church. The church is the key to family renewal and therefore to cultural renewal. And that's why the public policy is going to be important, but it's not going to be sufficient if the church doesn't rise to the occasion. We're now more than 3 generations into the sexual revolution, and we see more and more Americans have gone along with the mantra of consenting adults should do with their bodies whatever consenting adults want to do. And with the ensuing just disregard for traditional marital norms. And what I mean by this, we've seen the rise of cohabitation, we've seen the normalization of the hookup culture, we've seen the normalization of premarital sex, of non-marital childbearing, the introduction of no-fault divorce laws, and then the more than doubling of the rates of divorce. The marriage rate has fallen by 65% since 1970. So compared to the pre-sexual revolution 60s, we're left with fewer marriages, more divorces, fewer kids, more atomized adults. The kids that we do have are frequently growing up without fathers, increasingly growing up without siblings. Many of our elderly are now aging without spouses and without kids, which is why, to my mind, it's not surprising that at this moment in time, when we have the best medicine in all of human history, the best palliative care, the best hospice programs, it's only now that we think we have to kill our grandparents, right? And that's related to the breakdown of marriage in the family. The sexual revolution has therefore attacked not just the transmission of life and the beginnings of life, but it's now destroyed the matrix of love and care and support that the family provides throughout the life cycle, from conception to natural death. But properly understood, marriage as a social, political, civil institution, something I said probably thousands of times during the decades leading up to Obergefell, it's meant to bring together a man and a woman as husband and wife to then be mother and father to any children that they know, within the context of a permanent and an exclusive union, so that those children will be produced with a permanent and exclusive relationship with their mother and their father, committed to each other and therefore committed to those children. By ensuring a man and a woman commit to each other before engaging in the act that can create new life, marriage helps guarantee that a mother and father will therefore be committed to that life. Which is simply another way of saying, if you want to get fathers involved in the lives of their children, you need to get fathers committed to those future potential mothers. Right, we now have decades of social science. As Dr. Moeller said, we don't need social science for this, but we now have decades of social science that confirms what every one of our grandparents knew, because there's a law written on the heart that marriage is the best institution for the bearing and rearing of children. It protects against child poverty. It increases the odds of social mobility. It decreases the rates of delinquency. It decreases the rates of crime, increases the rates of graduation and employment. And then the ensuing social goods, things like social justice, limited government, care for the poor, protection for liberty, all of those things are better served by a strong, healthy marriage culture than by big government programs and a police state, a welfare state and a police state that tries to pick up the pieces of a broken marriage culture. Okay, but it's not just these secular metrics. We can cite off the social science on crime and employment, on graduation. Marriage and family are the sources of many of life's deepest fulfillments and happiness. And yet we're now in a situation where millions of our neighbors have missed out on these great goods. Right? Perhaps that's the deepest form of the victimization that has been caused by the sexual revolution. The people who gladly bought into the ideology and lived out the mantras, thinking they were being liberated from oppressive and outdated strictures, when in reality they were enslaving themselves to lives spent chasing dopamine and oxytocin hits. Right? Consent plus condoms doesn't make people happy. That's been the mantra of the past 60 years of the sexual revolution. And no one on his or her deathbed thinks back on his life and his various and sundry orgasms. Right? On the deathbed, what you think back to is love built up over decades-long relationships with spouse, with children, if you're fortunate to be like Dr. Moeller, with grandchildren. Right? Something that we haven't been promoting as a cultural reality. Okay, so let me say a little bit to expand on that and what this means for law and culture. First thing to say is that all institutions of society should take the family seriously. What I mean by this is that the church should take marriage and the family seriously. Our schools should take marriage and the family seriously. Hollywood should take marriage and the family seriously. Our businesses should take marriage and the family seriously. Our charities, our hospitals, our medical systems should take marriage and the family system. And so too should the state. It's only when we get to the state that people think, whoa, wait a minute, that means some big government program. I'm a limited government conservative. I don't want pro-family policy because it means socialism, something like that. I want to address that in a minute, but first just realize all of human reality, all of society, every institution of society should take marriage and the family seriously, because marriage and the family are a given of human nature. It's part of the social ontology that both Dr. Moeller and Denny spoke about. Right? There's a certain given based upon how we were created, how we are created, put it in the active tense, not the past tense. Marriage has a nature based upon human nature, a social ontology based upon both theological and philosophical anthropology. Because God has created us a certain way, embodied as male and female, where male and female can unite as one flesh in the context of a permanent and exclusive commitment. That's a social reality that all other institutions of human society should recognize and respect, including the government. So what this means is that the government does not create marriage. Right? As we heard earlier, God has created marriage. Marriage is a natural institution before it's a political institution. So some political theorists will refer to it as a pre-political institution. The state doesn't create marriage, but the state should recognize marriage. The state should respect marriage. The state should promote marriage. First, do no harm. The state shouldn't redefine marriage. We've seen within my lifetime the state redefine marriage to eliminate the requirement for sexual complementarity. So the redefinitions of Obergefell and Windsor. But before I was born, we saw the state redefine marriage to make it no longer a permanent institution with the introduction of no-fault divorce laws. We saw the state redefine marriage by making it kind of an optional institution, right? We've had the state, so that's the redefinition part. We've also had the state undermine marriage in policy. The way that we've structured our education system, the way that we've structured our welfare programs, to actually take parents out of the driver's seat of education, to make marriage optional when it comes to social support and welfare. Historically, if you think about marriage policy, things as simple as joint tax returns, recognizing children as dependents, right? We don't need to think about this as like a big government program. Simply the state recognizing Denny and his wife and his kids as a unit is the state recognizing a real social ontology, that there's the Burke family, and the state should interact with them as a family. Right? That's going to actually be, to my mind, a limit on government. The government has to respect a pre-existing reality and how it, in this case, addresses the tax code, how we have family law, how we have respect for parental rights. But in addition to respecting this reality, the state can disincentivize, it can discourage behaviors that would undermine it. And so for most of the history of the United States up until about the same time as the sexual revolution, we had laws that penalized fornication, laws that penalized adultery, laws that prohibited obscenity, laws that would only allow for divorce with cause, not so-called no-fault unilateral divorce. All right, simply to say that we want to have laws and policies that recognize and respect the ontological reality of marriage and family. We want to have laws and policies that foster the social and the moral ecology that's hospitable to marriage and family. Okay, so what do we do now? How should we think about this today? All right, we all know the breakdown of the family: lower marriage rates, higher divorce rates, single parenting, below replacement level fertility. This has now given rise to a movement known as pronatalism. You might have seen a couple New York Times story about the pronatalists. I think it's been best embodied, or not best embodied, I don't want to use best as a morally approving term. It's maybe most embodied in Elon Musk. Pronatalism, you understand now why I don't want to say it's best, it's most. He's had dozens of kids with perhaps a dozen of women. And what's odd here is that it hasn't been the old-fashioned way. I mean, we've seen here some combination of natalism plus technology plus eugenics plus embryo screening to be natalist, but not within an understanding of marriage or the family. So look, first thing to say about additional policies to marriage and the family is that pronatalism is not enough. It's a title of an article that a colleague of mine, Patrick Brown, wrote by that title, Pronatalism Not Enough. Because it's not just that we want babies and fertility, we want marital fertility. We want babies conceived within the context of marriage and the family. First, because this is what's best for babies. This is what justice requires. What justice requires of us is to see to it that children are conceived, born, and reared by their married mothers and fathers. That's what justice requires. But then second, even if all you care about is getting more babies, the way that you get more babies is by getting more marriages. The decline in fertility in the United States is entirely an artifact of the decline of marriage. So another way of saying this, had marriage rates in America remained the same, our fertility rates would virtually be the same. We would still be above replacement level fertility. We wouldn't have seen the drop. The drop that we see in fertility is because we've had a drop in marriage. And if you want to get babies, you need to get people married. All right, let me say, I want to say something that's complementary to what Dr. Moeller said about why we were seeing some of the decline in marriage. I assumed, because I know Dr. Moeller in his work, that he would focus on some of the ideological attacks on marriage. I want to say a little bit about some of the functional changes on marriage, some of the pragmatic reasons that throughout history people have had to get married and how that has changed. So think about marriage as an institution that has instrumental benefits. And you could say, all right, why would you want to get married 100, 200, 300, 1,000 years ago? Because you want to have sex, because you want to have babies, because you need a helpmate, a companion, a caretaker, because you need an economic provider, because you want economies of scale, because you need someone to care for you when you're old, because you want social status and respect within your community. Right? So what I mean by this is that historically, if you wanted to have sex, having a spouse, especially in a culture that respected chastity, that was the best way to have sex, especially if you wanted frequent sex. Turns out it still is the best way. Married people have a lot more sex than the unmarried. Right? Turns out that getting married is still a good way to have sex. And prior to the advent of contraception, Denny mentioned this, that we only created technology to separate these things. If you wanted to have sex, it just so happened that 9 months later, a certain percentage of the time, there was going to be a baby that was born. Right? Sex and babies just kind of came together by happenstance. Right? So you might want to get married because you want to have sex. You might want to get married precisely because you want to have babies. And this is why that poll that Dr. Moeller mentioned is so disturbing. Historically, it was primarily women that were really, really interested in having babies. The guys were more interested in having the sex. The girls were more interested in having the babies. There was a kind of a deal that could be brought here. We get together, you get the sex, I get the babies. We might find out that we both actually like both of these things. Right? Marriage brings distinctively masculine and feminine tendencies into a greater union. Right? You might need a helpmate, a companion, a caretaker. Right? So as you age out of your parents' home and you start making life on your own, you might not want to face life alone. And historically, the way that you would start this is by starting your own family, getting married. You might need an economic provider. This is particularly true historically in the case of women, as Dr. Moeller mentioned, the change in the workforce composition. Right? Historically, you would want to have a husband. Economies of scale, especially if you were living on a family farm. We live on a farm. My kids are not yet old enough to be helpful, but one day they might be. And you could see how historically, if you were an agrarian society, marriage would be part of the foundation of these economics, home economics. And then look, before the Social Security Act was passed in the United States, if you wanted Social Security as you grew older, you needed children and grandchildren. They were your Social Security. And then in most cultures up until recent time, marriage was a sign of social status and respect. Right? You were afforded success as you got married and started a family because it was seen as an achievement. All right, now think about these functional, pragmatic arguments. You could have sex without marriage, thanks to the sexual revolution, the hookup culture, the pill. You can have babies without being married, thanks to non-marital childbearing. You can be socially supported without marriage. We have the welfare state, and we have various drugs and technology to entertain people. You can be self-sufficient without a man. Think about the Gloria Steinem quote, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. You can grow old without kids, right? There's a welfare state, there's a safety net. So yes, there is an economic aspect to marriage, but it's not the economic aspect that I think most people think of. It's how many of these functional goods that marriage had served in a pragmatic sense have one by one been reduced, which means the main driver, I think, going forward is going to be the intrinsic good of marriage, right? Not the pragmatic instrumental benefits that marriage can bring, but actually the goodness of marriage itself, the joy and the fulfillment of being a husband, being a wife, being a mother, being a father itself. Now, there's an economic component to that. So yes, it costs money to raise kids, but there was a paper 3 years ago, 2022, 3 economists trying to explain why haven't marriage and fertility rates rebounded after the Great Recession? Because we've all known there have been downturns in the economy, marriage and fertility will drop momentarily, and normally they come back up. But since 2007, they haven't. And this is what they write. The key explanation for the post-2007 sustained decline in U.S. birth rates is not about some changing policy or cost factor, but rather shifting priorities across cohorts of young adults. Right? And it's the shifting cultural values of young adults. It's the opportunity cost of getting married and having kids. If I settle down now and have kids now, I'm going to miss out on all sorts of novel excitement and fulfillment. I can get another degree. I could make more money. I could have all of these experiences, right? These things that I document on my smartphone and then put on my Instagram account or my Twitter feed, these curated experiences, and marriage and kids will get in the way of that, right? It's the shifting priorities. It's what the Johns Hopkins sociologist Andrew Sherlin referred to as a capstone of your life rather than the cornerstone of your life. Marriage is now being viewed as the capstone when you have everything else, all of your other ducks in the row. You have all of your advanced degrees, all of your international travel, all of your perfect Instagram pictures. Then you can get married. It's why, as Dr. Moeller pointed out, it's now Geriatric pregnancy is now the norm, right? Your first pregnancy when you're in your 30s rather than at age 20. Interestingly enough, they're both a class divide and a religious divide to this. Those who are well-educated and well-employed and those who are religious are still getting married and staying married and having children in a way that those who are less educated, less successful in their careers, and less religious are not. Okay. All right, so let me say a little bit about now, to wrap this up, some of the policies that we could think about that would address, given the context that we're operating in. First is that we should not be embracing any of the natalism just as such policies. For example, let's make IVF free. Hugely problematic, and I'm glad that Denny groaned. I mean, it's morally problematic because of, one, I happen to think that IVF is just intrinsically immoral. To try to create new life outside of the marital embrace in and of itself is morally problematic. But IVF also entails the creation and the destruction, or the creation and the freezing of millions of embryonic human beings. So I think there are both understanding marriage as a conjugal union reasons to be opposed to IVF. I think there are also pro-life reasons to be opposed to IVF. I think there are also simply natalist reasons to be opposed to IVF. If you promise people that you can always just have IVF later, it's only going to lead age of first birth later and later. Because you're going to tell yourself, wait, I can get another degree. I can do another trip. I can have another experience. And then if I'm in my 30s and I experience infertility, I'll just use IVF or whatever the new technology will be. Look at that interview that Ross Douthat conducted with the CEO of Orchid to see what the future beholds. So that's not what we should be doing. All right, a couple of things that we should be doing. We still have marriage penalties in our tax code and in our welfare welfare programs, our safety net. Poor people are not stupid. They may be poor, but they're not stupid. And they can see that if I get married, the welfare benefits that I receive, because now it'll be two of us, they will actually go down, right? If we get married, our tax burden will go up because we'll now be bumped into a higher tax bracket. Right? We should not have any, first do no harm, we should not have any public policies that disincentivize marriage, and yet we still have, both in our welfare safety net programs and in our tax code, marriage penalties. The Welfare Reform Act that Bill Clinton signed into law back in '94, they were supposed to have two main priorities, work requirements and marriage promotion. They only ever got around to doing the work requirements, right? So we have to do both the marriage promotion and therefore the marriage elimination of penalties. Second, symbolic stuff, including the bully pulpit, actually matters because it can shape culture. And so here I think the fact that J.D. Vance has been bringing his kids on some of these vice presidential trips. He took some of his kids to some of his European trips early in the administration when he was speaking. I forget, it was a technology conference. It was a conference in Paris where he brought the kids. I think that's important. Normalize family life. Normalize children. And I think JD is uniquely placed for that. There's other public policy stuff that can be symbolic. Things like having pregnant mother, expectant mother parking spaces, the way that we have handicapped parking spaces, or mothers with infants, with newborn parking spaces. It's a sign that, like, we esteem you. We want people, Americans with Disabilities Act, we want people with disabilities to be fully integrated into society, and so we're going to have handicap ramps, we're going to have special parking lots. We want mothers with young children to be fully integrated and welcomed. Pre-boarding on airplanes, right? Small symbolic things. I don't think any of this is actually going to drive up the fertility rate. Not in the short run. No one's going to say, oh, I can board the plane earlier. I'm going to have another baby, right? That's because, again, like, it's how we culturally value marriage. The child tax credit. Again, I don't think someone is going to say, wait, we could get $1,000 off of our taxes next year. Let's have another baby. But for those who want to have another baby, having the child tax credit go from $1,000 a year to $5,000 a year, have it to go for each child. If you have four kids, a $20,000 tax credit, that can be meaningful in the sense of we want another one and now we can afford it, right? So I don't think it's going to change the priority schedule of someone to say, well, we now want another child. But for people who want that child, but who previously thought they couldn't afford the child, increasing something like the child tax credit will move the needle there. I think laws that would allow for more generous paid family leave for families who, for economic reasons, need to have both parents in the workforce. Having a situation where you give birth on a Friday and you're expected to be back at work on a Monday is just unsustainable. And so having a more generous paid family leave, teaching the success sequence. How many of you are familiar with the success sequence? I see a couple hands. Something that scholars at the Brookings Institution were some of the first. This is a left-leaning institution. The fact that if you graduate from high school, get a job, and get married before having kids, you'll have a 3% chance of experiencing poverty. Simply teaching some of these facts in middle school and high school, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so those are some of the direct policy. I'm more bullish on the indirect policies because, again, I don't think any of those direct policies is going to reorder someone's priorities. All right, here's what I think could reorder priorities or could create the conditions for that, and I'll go kind of in, to my mind, somewhat order of importance. One is we can have policies that would make men more marriageable, more attractive to women. We don't need to get into the details of things like industrial policy or tariff policy or how we revitalize blue-collar jobs. We should have those debates on the merits. But what does good economic policy for, in particular, unskilled male labor, for blue-collar male labor? Everything since I've been a child has been focused on college education. But only 1/3 of Americans graduate with a 4-year college degree. For the 2/3 who aren't, why don't we have more apprenticeships, more vocational training, more pathways to success and like middle-class livelihoods for those individuals? It's all been focused on get people into college. That hasn't worked. So we can think through and we don't need to answer the question of what these policies would look like, but it should be part of our policy toolkit, policies that would improve the prospects for working class men. So that's to make men more marriageable. Second, make marriage and kids more affordable. If you talk to young adults right now and you ask them like, what financially makes you think you're not ready for marriage, they'll mention two things. They'll mention housing costs and they'll mention education costs. This is particularly true for Christian parents who won't send their kids to the government-run public schools because their kids will be corrupted. I can't afford housing, and I can't afford to educate my kids. The local classical Christian school is too expensive. So I think, again, we can debate on the merits. What would good housing policy look like? But I think, increasing right now the supply of housing, allowing for more development, more construction, but then also school choice policies. Doing whatever we can, again, to recognize the family as an ontological reality, meaning that we structure our education system so that my wife and I are empowered to choose the education that's best for our children, rather than being zoned for this one government school, or we're entirely on the hook for the education ourselves, right? And that's the situation we're in right now, because we live in Loudoun County, Virginia, and we love our kids too much to send them to the Loudoun County schools, right? And there's no reason why, because we have financial resources, we can opt out of the Loudoun County schools, but the children that live half a mile away in the trailer park, that's their only option, right? And so part of this family policy would be school choice. Third, make parenting less of a challenge. And what I want to mention here, there are lots of things we could do here, but most importantly, I want to mention these devices in our pockets and the challenge that conscientious parents right now are facing when it comes to their kids and these devices. I think requiring parental consent before any social media accounts, any sort of smartphone, anything like that is accessible to a minor is an absolute must. Denny mentioned the various ideologies that have radicalized people. It seems highly likely right now that the assassin who took Charlie Kirk's life was radicalized online. Right? And so we should realize that both there's just stuff that's objectionable itself on these platforms. It's a time suck. It's addictive. There's also crazy ideologies. And it's allowing people to bypass the parents. You're giving a device to a child so that total strangers can now shape your child's moral worldview without any parental notification. So I think what we can do there to simply empower parents to be the parents, age verification and technology. This will also pay a long-term dividend that we don't yet have solid social science on this, but I'll make a prediction. The kids that have the most online livelihoods as children will be the least likely to get married a generation from now. The children who have the most touch grass livelihoods, childhoods, will be the ones that are most likely to get married. Because they're going to be the ones interacting with flesh and blood human beings of the opposite sex rather than doing avatars online, right? So it's both an immediate, how can we assist parents in the trenches today? It's also, how do we then lay the groundwork for a generation from now? Next area. So I've mentioned make men more marriageable, make marriage and kids more affordable, make parenting less of a challenge. Cultural promotion of marriage. Dr. Moeller and I spoke about this earlier when I recorded an interview with him. Almost every prominent TV show from my youth, and so this is going to be dating myself a little bit, it dramatized. I mean, people were concerned about obscenity on TV. Oh, we can't have full frontal nudity. We can't have sex acts on TV, things like this. They weren't as attentive to the storylines and to what was being dramatized. In almost every prominent TV show from my childhood, the husband and the father was a doofus. It was Homer Simpson. It was Al Bundy. Marriage and family was presented as the end of fun and enjoyment. Meanwhile, what was glamorized, it was Seinfeld. It was Friends. If you think about these TV shows, these unattached, isolated, atomistic adults just living these careful shows about nothing, lives about nothing in Manhattan. And so the cultural imaginary that was formed is that I want to keep myself as unencumbered as possible, move to the big city, have a job that gives me money to go out to happy hour every night and to sleep with someone every night, to wake up and I don't want to have marriage and kids would be the end of my fun, right? So the cultural script here now needs to be changed. We're lucky that we now have some Hollywood studios that are more or less values aligned with the people in this room. Studios like Sycamore Studios, Angel Studios. We now actually have some like faith-based producers and directors and studio companies. And I would say technology sometimes can provide solutions. We as parents now have much more control over the options of what we allow our kids to see. When my children asked to like stream one, we don't watch broadcast TV. And when we stream something, it had to have been created in the 1980s or earlier. Because I don't trust anything that came after. And if I haven't like pre-screened it, I'm not going to take the risk. But for the most part, if it was made in the 60s, 70s, 80s, it's not going to be that woke. But the new material that's coming out is actually high artistic quality plus good messaging. All right, a couple other things. Formation for marriage. We do have this network of classical Christian schools. I don't know if they yet know what is the best practices for forming graduates who will be marriage-minded. So I think one of the areas that we should be thinking about is do some audits where you look at your graduating classes 5, 10, 15 years later. Which schools are producing graduates with the highest marriage rates, the lowest divorce rates, and then emulate what they're doing. What does their campus culture look like? What does their school tech policy look like? What does the dating culture look like? Right? We have control over our own institutions. And then for public policy, we should do whatever we can to promote religion. Because religion is ultimately going to be, and by religion here, I'll be explicit, to promote Christianity. But public policy needs to be neutral with respect to religious traditions. So one of this would be protecting religious liberty. Give the churches, synagogues, mosques as much freedom as possible to form the next generation. The state cannot change our value system directly. It can do things at the margins, but what it can do is it can empower the houses of worship who will then change our value system, change our order of priorities, change how we understand marriage. Yes, I mean, when I say state can do things at the margin, we could bring back blue laws. I'm not opposed to having Sunday closing laws. I'm not opposed to having more national days of prayer and thanksgiving. If it was good enough for Washington, good enough for Lincoln, why isn't it good enough for us? I mean, we should be using, I thought it was great that earlier this week, J.D. Vance, when he was guest hosting the Charlie Kirk show, more or less recited the Nicene Creed. Right? And so I think there are various things that we can do, both bully pulpit and public policy, to promote religious liberty and to promote religion. But then at the end of the day, the church herself needs to step up to the plate here. When you look at some of the stats, yes, Christian marriage rates are higher than non-Christians. Christian divorce rates lower than non-Christians. Christian fertility rates higher than non-Christians, but only by a little. It's not as night and day difference as you think it should be for those who believe the truth about what marriage is. And so I'll just close by mentioning that there's a ministry that I've gotten to know called Communio, which is a marriage ministry that partners with local churches to help local churches develop a marriage ministry. They had done a survey, and it was something like only 3% of churches had explicit marriage ministries as part of their regular offerings. And so what they do is they simply partner with churches to give a vision to the pastor. This is what you should be doing with your local congregation. This is what you should be preaching, what you should be teaching, what you should be doing with the youth group, the young adult group, the marriage prep. Help them cast a vision. And then they actually help them craft the agenda. You need to have date nights at your church. Your church should be the hub of courtship and dating, not the bar scene, not online dating, but actually have your church be the place where young people meet each other, where it's marriage focused. Have ministries where you have older couples mentoring younger couples. Have dances in the church hall. Have beer tasting nights, wine tasting nights. And when you have all of these fun activities, also bring in a message. Bring in an older couple who can talk to younger couples. Always provide babysitting at these events that you're putting on, so you don't make the cost of a babysitter simply identifying a babysitter. If you can help couples get through the first about 7 years of marriage, their divorce rates go way down. So anyway, they've now come up with a toolkit that they can just pass on to the pastor to help them develop these things. And I think ultimately that's when you think about what are the policy, get out of the way, do what you can at the margins, and then let the church be the church. All right, and so with that, I'm out of time, so I'm going to do whatever Richard tells me to do to not break the microphone.